Okay, we are live.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us today. We're excited to start our next panel. The title is Retaining a Community. Today on the call, we have Marsha Brownlee from Artemis. We have Adrian Angulo from TRCP, the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. And we have Howard Vincent from Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever. We are very excited to welcome our panelists as we discuss retaining a community. So before we begin, I wanted to offer some kind of perspective to set the stage for the panel today. The title is Retaining a Community, and these words were carefully selected. Retaining because COVID-19 has resulted in increased participation across outdoor recreation activities, and we face a new challenge of retaining participants in these activities for the long haul. So much of our thoughts went to recruitment pre-COVID, and now AC after COVID, we need to think about retention. Our goal tactically will be to reduce churn rates and ensure many of these participants don't lapse. And we can begin to analyze the results of our efforts. We can track churn rates, set goals for a certain number, and we should do this to ensure we tactically keep people active. But while we are evaluating the results of our R3 efforts in terms of numbers, we should also think bigger about what we are doing. COVID-19 drove many people outdoors, whether to connect with family, to harvest or gather their own food, or to just distress and connect with nature. How long COVID-19 lasts, we do not know for sure. But we have people's attention right now, and there are things we can do beyond programs to keep them here. As we work to retain new and current participants, there are things we can do to help ensure the community of outdoor recreationists and conservationists are welcoming to these participants. So we're presenting on the tail end of the release of new research on mentoring, and many of our common assumptions on mentoring, including the word itself, are bucked. We are now aware that we have much work to do in the way of discussing, bringing in, and teaching new hunters and more instructors. And this conversation can both build on those results and lead us forward to discuss the future AC after COVID. So our panelists today are excited. We've prepared 5 questions for discussion. We're going to start by allowing each participant to introduce themselves just a little bit and present just some perspectives on the topic to kick us off. So Marsha Brownlee of Artemis is going to introduce us, also the National Wildlife Federation, and she'll tell you more. Marsha, welcome.
Yeah. Hi, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here and engage in this conversation. Retaining women hunters and community building are both passions of mine and something I spend probably a lot of time thinking about. I won't say more than I should, but a lot. So personally, my background, I grew up in Michigan and I currently live in Montana. I've been here for 10 years. I started hunting and fishing as an adult. I've been fishing for about 10 years and hunting for about 5. So I share, a mutual experience with a lot of women hunters and anglers who are currently coming to it as adults, which has been helpful. And my own personal experience seeking community is one that I think a lot of people can relate to. Artemis is an initiative of the National Wildlife Federation. It's an initiative to engage women hunters and anglers in conservation advocacy, recognizing that a huge part of that is recruitment, retention, and reactivation. We started in 2017, focused most of our work in the West, but recently this year, in February of this year, we expanded nationally and brought on 40 volunteer ambassadors from across the country, just in time for them not to be able to offer events. So the timing was a little off, but we've pivoted and are still working with them, and they're doing great things. For those of you who know the National Wildlife Federation, you know that we have affiliate organizations across the country. So in most of our states, we will have a wildlife federation, such as the Montana Wildlife Federation, the Georgia Wildlife Federation, Tennessee Wildlife Federation. I'm sure most of you are familiar with these state organizations that do such good work. And so we do a lot of our recruitment and engagement in partnership with them, which is something that has proven to be a really great relationship in both connecting locally with women and then elevating them to the national stage with the National Wildlife Federation. Things that we do in particular, we have a podcast. It's a weekly podcast that talks to women hunters and anglers and conservationists about important issues and tells our story through hunting and fishing through our lens. We host events both virtually and in person when we're able to, and we have virtual groups, both nationally and state-based, that women can find us and engage with us through.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the snapshot. I know Artemis has come and grown as a partner that we've worked with in the last 2 years. Just 17 surprises me. I thought you've been around a little bit longer than that. You are a member of the implementation work group as well. So thanks for being here with us today.
Yeah.
Next up, we will have Howard Vincent, President and CEO of Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever. Howard, please take it away.
Thanks, Samantha. So again, I'm Howard Vincent, President and CEO of Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever. I've been a part of this organization now coming on 33 years of the kind of 38-year history here. So back in 2000, I became the CEO. Prior to that, and in another lifetime, I was in public accounting. So at the end of the day, I'm a bean counter, I guess. But I'm calling you from St. Paul, Minnesota, where our national headquarters are right now. I grew up classic. My father introduced me to the outdoors. I come from a very big family. I'm the last of 11 kids, so hunting was an important part of my family. And I've continued that tradition with my two sons. They love to hunt. Time is the commodity. They're the perfect millennials, and they're our perfect target. But at the same time, they're going to come to this sport differently than I came to it, or they're going to participate differently. And so Pheasants Forever, Quail Forever, we're a habitat organization. We don't raise release birds. We put our dollars in the ground. We typically impact about 1.5 million acres annually through our local chapters. And right now we have about 500 Pheasants Forever chapters and about roughly 200 Quail Forever chapters across that quail range. Our unique model is when the chapters put on that local banquet, they retain essentially 100% of the net fundraising locally. So each one of those chapter committees has their own checkbook. We receive that $35 membership fee to deliver the magazine and that side of it. But beyond that, those chapters retain the balance of those funds. And they're our first dollar that we raise, and then it's National Operations Challenge to go match those dollars. And we're really, really good at that. Right now, we have over 250 Farm Bill biologists, strike team members, habitat coordinators, R3 coordinators out there on the landscape across the country, and they're delivering mission. And for us, again, it's habitat advocacy in Washington, D.C. or at the state level, and then also education outreach, which for us is our R3 initiative. And we are all in on R3, like many of our conservation partners. And the name is a little limiting. This isn't just about pheasants and quail. We look at that acre of habitat that we put in the ground, obviously benefits soil, water, pollinators, monarchs. We have sage grouse initiatives, lesser prairie chicken initiatives, golden wing warbler, cold stream restoration programs. So if the dollars go in the ground, we're all in. And we also recognize that we do nothing by ourselves. There are so many incredible partners, whether it's at our federal partners at NRCS and FSCA, our state agency partners who help match those dollars. And in the end, we're delivering a very common mission and a very common delivery. And whether that's new young faces in our communities, or whether that's retaining the conversation today, or hopefully reactivating as well. So that's kind of a quick snapshot.
Thank you, Howard. We're really excited to dive into some of those comments too. And next we have Adrian Angulo. Adrian, thank you for joining us. You're the Hispanic Outreach Manager for the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, correct?
Yeah, that's right. And buenas tardes. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Sam, for that introduction. And everyone that worked so hard to put on this event, and everyone that took time out of their day to be here and let us borrow some of your time. And my name is Adrian Angulo. I'm with the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. I am the Hispanic Outreach Manager. Just a quick bit of information on my organization, the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. We have a simple mission, guarantee all Americans quality places to hunt and fish. And to do that, the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, from now on, I think I'm just going to say TRCP. We have a 60+ partner policy group that helps create federal policy funding solutions by uniting all of these partners at different times throughout the year, amplifying the voices of American sportsmen, sportswomen, hunters, and anglers in service of Theodore Roosevelt's vision and his conservation legacy. So a little bit more about my specific work as the Hispanic Outreach Manager. I was brought on to really help galvanize, amplify, and collect the Hispanic sportsmen and women's voice. And it's a surprise to some, but the Hispanic voice has not been present in conservation, in traditional conservation spaces. It's definitely been present on this continent since before the Mayflower was even at a shipyard in Europe somewhere. But the conservation space is really a lot stronger when all of our voices are put together. And so the way I galvanize and unite voices is, again, some of these federal funding streams, most recently the Pittman-Robertson Modernization Act, is going to allow state agencies to get a little bit more money back. And so my piece of this project is to sort of figure out, are there creative ways that we can use some of that money, tailor some of these state agency programs so that we're really targeting and not only just recruiting, but retaining folks in the Hispanic community and other diverse communities as well. Another piece of my work, so that's obviously R3, another piece of my work is just to make sure that local water issues are really presented in a way that local Hispanic voices are at the forefront, because often local Hispanic communities are at the tail end of some water manipulations and water scarcity issues, especially across the West. I think that about covers my scope of work, and I think throughout the conversation we'll get into it a little bit more. But just some background on me: I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in the South Valley, and I came up and I went to school for liberal arts, and that led me to get really politically active in local initiatives, ballot initiatives for green causes, trying to get solar panels put on community homes, especially in low-income areas. And somehow I got wrangled into a land commissioner race, and meeting this land commissioner and just figuring out what was new to me at the time, just like this conservation ethic. Howard talks about being brought up classic. This gentleman that was running for land commissioner was very classic, and just invited me to put in for tags and took me out on my first archery elk hunt last year that was successful. So at 27, a very adult onset hunter, I took down my first elk, and I've been eating it since. If anybody wants to help me with that, I'll mail you something. But I think ever since then, and before then, I kind of had this sense of, the idea of federal lands. A lot of people like the idea of going out and being able to hike and hunt and fish. But the idea of ownership of federal lands is something that we really need to be giving to everyone, because when we all have like a sense of ownership, particularly Hispanics and diverse communities, we make sure we're protecting that resource because it belongs to all of us. And on that very corny sort of tagline, I'll give it back to Sam.
I don't think corny is appropriate at all. I think I love your story. I love each of your stories. And I just like the way that we have an opportunity here to discuss some of the concepts you brought up, Adrian and Howard and Marcia. And so what I'd like to do is just jump right into the very first question we have. I'm going to read that for the audience. And that's, as we discuss the concept of retaining a community of participants, what comes to mind? Talk about community, tell us what you're thinking and what gets you going. I think I'll start with Marcia, just to prompt that first, and let's talk. What do you think?
Thank you. Yeah. So there's a number of things, and I'll try and narrow it down for the time frame that we have. But I think when I think of the concept of retaining a community of participants, what comes to mind for me is the importance of doing so both locally and nationally. It's the importance of relationships in retention and the flexibility that relationships provide. And it's the importance of confidence because I think for me personally, just speaking of my own journey and the journey that I've heard echoed in a lot of new hunters, those experiences in the field when you're first introduced to hunting are priceless, and you're flooded with information. And I think the way I've likened it is transitioning from the passenger seat on a hunt to the driver's seat on a hunt. And stepping over into the driver's seat to really take control of your own experience when you're in the field can be intimidating. And I've found that having a community around to reach out to and to support that initiative was priceless in my retention. I think without making that step, and I think it's different for everybody, but without making that step from passenger to driver, retention becomes much more difficult. And then the flexibility of relationships. I think, again, everybody needs something different at different times in their lives. And I think particularly when we're talking about reactivation and, you know, new jobs and having families and changing relationships, a community needs to be broad enough to be flexible to give each of us what we need at different times in our journey. And then, again, the importance of doing so both locally and nationally. The structure of Artemis, we have the privilege of doing both, and our volunteers on the ground really make that possible. But it's important to have those resources nationally, then the conversation that you can look to, and again, that representation that's so important. And it was really important to me, and even like planting the seed that I could too be a hunter. And I think the national community is so important for planting those seeds. But then locally, everybody needs hunting partners to go out into the field with, and those personal relationships that we can reach out to when we have questions. And so addressing both local and national communities is vital to retention.
Technology. Thank you. The aspect of flexibility, I wrote that down really quick. The flexibility of relationships is going to stick with me for a while. And also the levels of community. I'm glad you brought that out right away. Howard, what are your thoughts?
You know, I think that's just dead on. I think community nails it, and that's a big umbrella. And so when I think of community, I think about family, and that's the family in the broadest sense. So yes, I can think about the Vincent family and my boys, and if I talk about them, I'll cry. I mean, that was very emotional for me. I've got a grandson for the first time who's all of, 3-4 months old, and I'm projecting what that means for myself, my boys, that child. But then I think about the Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever family and the support that we bring to not only our mission, but our community. So I've got 750 chapters that exist with kind of county-based all over the United States. And they're the face of the organization. It's their community that they raise money in, that they deliver money in, that they reach out to bring, whether it's that new 12-year-old in through a hunter safety program, to that next mentor step and beyond. And hopefully we're building that pathway. And then going from there, I mean, the entire conservation community, the evolution of the American Wildlife Conservation Partners right now is made up of 50 of the largest organizations. All 3 of the individuals on this, all 4 of us on this call are part of that organization. And that's a family. Believe me, it's very intimate, very personal relationships. This isn't the duck guys and the pheasant guys and the turkey guys. This is all of those organizations trying to work together to move R3 forward. And I know quite a few of our listeners out there are from our state partners. I'm going to make a pitch here for that family to engage our family in a bigger, better way. If you think about a new hunter coming to this, if you're thinking about an existing hunter already here, one of the greatest challenges out there on that landscape is access, is quality habitat. So all of these national wildlife conservation groups are delivering habitat. They're doing that work. They are a resource. They are mentors. And I think we need to do a better job with our state partners to drive them to those organizations. If they get the phone call from a novice woman hunter or somebody with who doesn't look like the 60-year-old white guy, they should be funneling those people to these conservation organizations. We'd love to have them as members, obviously, but they're also the path forward here for us. If if this community doesn't start looking like the public in the space that we live in, we're going to fail. And of course, that again, this is the R3 drumbeat, right? That clock's ticking, and this is going to be under our watch. So we've got arguably less than 15 years to make this community a much larger family with that looks different than it does today. And I'm excited. I know we can deliver this. And I'm going to leave you one last message. This entire community needs to make the ask. When you find someone who's a current hunter, so we're in the retention mode right now, that's the question on the table. We need to ask them specifically to be the mentor, specifically an actionable item. We can't allow them to hunt, buy the license, buy the ammo, and think their job is done, because it's not. We need, if we want to have their grandchildren have an opportunity, then we're going to have to engage the whole public community. And we've got 11 million hunters. If that's our biggest, best number, then we need to make 11 million asks. And they'll come. If asked, they'll come. I'll stop there.
No, you hit some great things and getting a lot of response. You got some fans, Howard. You got some big fans. I think what you brought up about the family aspect and the project, your vision and hope for them in the future is maybe something common. We all want a place where people can recreate and engage. And that's an element of community to me too, is common ground, right? And so, Adrian, what do you think? What are your thoughts here? I mean, building on Howard, access, common thing we've worked with on you with QRCP on as well. So add some thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. When I hear Howard talk about his boys, sometimes I want to cry just because of the way that Howard, and this is definitely a plug for Howard and the R3 work that he's obviously leading and doing all across the country. But just the story that he shared on a podcast recently about having to accept how different people recreate differently. He talked about his boys being on a deer stand and being more interested in doing the old fire hose off the deer stand just to see how far they could get, and that's okay. That is how they're going to recreate, and rather than like a heavy-handed correction, which would probably lead them away for a while, that there's a message there for being able to accept that while the outdoors is for all of us, we recreate outdoors differently. And that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. I'll share sort of a personal story before getting back to the core of what community means. I grew up not really hunting, fishing, definitely deep sea fishing in Mexico, but not hunting, not target shooting, anything like that. The first time I went shooting was just on some BLM land with some wood targets, paper targets, a watermelon, and just testing the gun out and firing a shotgun for the first time. And it was great. A lot of fun. Cleaned up our rounds because, and our trash, because that was one of the first things we saw when we did some research. Fast forward a couple years and I buy a pistol and go out to a range, an actual range. You pay money to get in. And, I walk onto the range and I'm shooting, and all of a sudden I hear very muffled. I think all ranges just have the standard muffled intercom that's just like, and that's all you hear. But the announcer was saying, ceasefire, ceasefire. I now know what that means. But with the excitement of just shooting my pistol for the first time, and I had just gotten to the range, I kept shooting, steady beat. And all of a sudden someone's tapping me on the shoulder like, what the heck are you doing? Don't you know? Don't you know? And just like I just felt shame. And I looked around and there were snickers all around me. And, my dad who was with me didn't really know. And we're all sorts of upset. So we end up just leaving. Come to find out, it's very common for a ceasefire on a range to be called all the time. It's like range 101, right? But our approach to get into that community was just, let's go, let's try it out, let's pay the fee. And I think that sometimes, and this isn't an accusation at all, but more of like an assessment, that I think sometimes when people grow up and it's just natural for them, they have these sets of standards that are just normal and natural for them. It's easy to forget that sometimes people need that 101. Hey, cease means stop and fire means the weapon, stop the weapon, right? And I think that whole range experience for me just continues to bring it home that we really need to reassess what we're taking for granted when we're bringing new people in. So that means, hey, this is the weapon, this is the trigger, you're at a range, these are our rules. And if we bring that back to the broader conservation community, that sentiment of these are our rules, in a way that goes back to, this is our land ethic. When you're outdoors, clean up your trash. When you're hunting, don't leave your granola bar wrappers everywhere. Things like that we should all know and understand. But in the sense of, instead of being corrective, I think we have an opportunity to be stewards, especially of first-time users, especially folks that are getting out for the first time. And I think just sort of philosophically going back to what it means to be in community, I think there's an important sense of love and belonging when we look at a human. They need water, they need food, they need shelter, they need sleep. And then at the other end of that spectrum, it's self-actualization. I need to be driven. I have philosophical wants and need. And smack dab in the middle of Maslow's hierarchy of need is this need to be loved and belong in friendship and intimacy and family and a sense of belonging. So I think as a conservation community, we really have an opportunity to, so one, it's a responsibility to, like Howard was saying, to recruit, but also make sure that recruitment and that those opportunities, like Marcia's saying, that those experiences are positive. So it's kind of a double-edged sword of, we need to get as much people through the door, but also not be corrective and kind of shepherd them into, these are our ethics, this is sort of the way that things ought to be done. So yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to share some of those thoughts.
Yeah, and they're good thoughts to share. You shared a lot, and I'm taking notes. That's what I'm doing, just so for conversation points, because I get lost in translation. If not, I get engaged in the conversation. I like the aspect that entire communities can have a common goal, but we can still recreate differently, and reassess what can be taken for granted. I think about the 5 million or more new firearms owners that NSSF has been educating us on recently, right? And Smith & Wesson just released with Julie Golub a new series to educate all firearms owners, new firearms owners, not specifically Smith & Wesson, just any firearms owner. And I think there's 20,000. I forget what the number is right now, but this is just happening right now. And so that case you experienced could happen like tomorrow at a range. It's not something that's like, gone. And I don't think it's ever going to completely be gone. It's something we might still have to deal with. And so some of these aspects of community are just like current things to address and then keep them going. As we talk more, I want to make sure you guys have some chances to build on each other, but I'll go into the second question because I think it leads into that. And it's, how does the concept of community factor into our participant being retained in hunting, target shooting, angling, conservation, or any other activity in the outdoors? And Marcia, I'm going to let you go first. We'll just keep that order, but you can let me know if you'd like to comment as well.
Okay, thank you. And actually, I think most of my thoughts on this question build nicely off of what Adrian just said about that sense of belonging. Because for me, I think there's Libby Metcalf is a professor at the University of Montana, and she's done research on the influence of constraints on female hunters and their negotiation strategies to overcome those constraints. And all hunters face constraints of some time, whether it's financial or time or access or social support. The list is really long and really varied. But Professor Metcalf's work talks about behavioral strategies and cognitive strategies to work through those constraints. And so behavioral strategies may include changes in time management, acquiring new skills, managing finances differently, creating and maintaining personal relationships. And then cognitive strategies are more like rationalizing a poor experience as a favorable one, or regulating emotions to match the actual experience. And a community where you can talk about your constraints, where you feel that sense of belonging and can openly discuss the challenges you're facing and feel supported, not occasionally, but consistently, to keep thinking about hunting and brainstorming solutions to constraints, hearing other people's experiences about how they overcame that. it's vital. And I think all constraints, even what might be perceived as small to some, still require intention to overcome. It's so easy to allow the rest of our lives and our commitments and responsibilities to consume the energy and attention. And that community really helps keep the hunting conversation or the shooting conversation, the conservation conversation, whatever it is we're focusing on, that community helps keep our attention on those at the forefront of our mind and at the forefront of the lifestyle choices we're making. And I think for me personally, I started out as a big game hunter, and then recently tried to become a turkey hunter. Tried being the operative word. I'm still working on it. But and I did this after accepting my position as program manager at Artemis. And the community that is currently helping me explore that has been vital. And that's everything from, Becca Aceto, who's an Idaho ambassador, pulled together a weekend turkey hunt camp that I attended in a professional capacity. And it was there that I first saw turkey harvested and saw someone demonstrate how to process it. And then from there, we had industry partners donate calls or an app to learn how to call. So I really had support from the industry to build those skills and have the tools that I needed, which is a unique situation, obviously, given the work that I do. And then it translates to, I spent way too long looking for turkeys and not finding them, and a friend shared waypoints. And then we had a virtual meeting, again, with the same group of women from Idaho to this year, since we couldn't do our camp, unfortunately. But I could ask questions about what I'd seen in the field and what those behaviors meant and how I could adjust my tactics there. And so that diversity of resources, the industry partners, the NGO partners, the personal friends and relationships that I had, I wouldn't have even thought of branching out into a different species, and certainly wouldn't think of doing it again this fall, despite my past failures, without that support.
And something of consistent support. That consistency time is really key. It's funny, we met in Montana last July for me to come out and learn how to Western hunt through an Artemis program. And the connection I made with other female hunters learning in a similar perspective, I still text them consistently. We still message. One of them got an antelope on her first solo hunt just recently. And that kind of motivated me to maybe make a early morning purchase earlier this week on a new tag for hunting out west. So that consistency and those connections, and I have other communities, right, that I can connect with and learn and go with, but that's one that I can experience out with, and they've been there and they're consistent. So I think you've highlighted a lot of different perspectives, and living that cast research, I'm a big fan of it. We have some that we'll be adding to the Arctic Clearinghouse as well. So Howard, what are your thoughts to build on that, the consistency and the idea of constraints and participation?
Well, if I think about this, I think about ways to reaffirm someone's passion. So we have this outdoor world. We have hunters who are obviously passionate, whether it's duck hunting, elk hunting, turkeys, and now how do we affirm and give them an opportunity to share their passion? So again, make the ask, would you be a mentor? Think about someone who's, and I'm in the upland bird space, right? So you can't talk about pheasants or quail unless you're talking about bird dogs, right? And if you talk to, and I'm making huge general sweep here, but it's not too far off the mark. If I would say the majority of those hunters, if they couldn't hunt with their dog, they wouldn't hunt. So this connectivity of, yes, I love to hunt, but what really reaffirms it and makes me passionate about this sport is the dog. And whether it's a flush or pointer, and you can really get into a lot of arguments about what type of dog you have, obviously. That's entertaining in itself. But what else can we do to reaffirm? And so, within our organization, I love our members, right? We've got 140,000 members across the country, right? The magic people are those volunteers, those 5 to 10 people in each county who give their time and energy. Give them an opportunity to tell their story about what they're doing, whether that's a mentor hunt where they're talking about their dog, whether it's a trap shooter who wants to talk about the shotgun, right? Whether it's tracking, right? Give somebody an opportunity to talk about their passion. They'll sell the program for you and reaffirm about why they're there. And then beyond that, this middle space of R3, right? Recruit, we're talking about retention, and then there's reactivation. This team in the middle, that's the push-pull, right? We're pulling those young faces in. We're pulling different faces in, right? People who don't look like that norm. And then we're also, we've got to push those who have left the sport, push them back in, right? We've got to ask them to come back because we need that help. So there's this sweet spot in the middle, and make no mistake, us, and I'm at some level the poster child here. I'm that 63-year-old white guy, and to date, this group, and that's the perfect bell curve, right? Across the country of hunting, we failed, right? Because we thought we were going to do the same thing over and over again. Howard's boys are going to hunt. Yep. Well, we haven't even duplicated ourselves in that space. So, but this is still the group who's going to have to change on how we view the world. And Adrian and Marcia both said this. I mean, we need to be welcoming. We need to, no matter what someone's path is into this sport, that's got to be okay. It's irrelevant how I came to the sport. It's irrelevant how the other 60-year-old white guys came to this. We need to be accepting and welcoming. We need to listen. Adrian and TRCP put on this incredible event down in New Mexico a year or two ago, and I was able to spend a couple days there, and it was so incredibly eye-opening. They brought the Hispanic community and that geography, and you can think you're welcoming, and you can think your door's open, and if somebody walks in, that's not enough. And internally, within my organization, if I get a chance, we got to get off our own front porch and seek out difference, and then celebrate that difference, right? In your magazines, this is authentic. This isn't creating something that doesn't exist. We're not showing a picture of something we'd like it to look like. This exists, but we need to work with the Hispanic community, the Black community, have those individuals who already hunt, already fish, and tell their stories, show them in our publication, show them on social media, women in our sport. We need to tell everyone's story, not just this. And these characters have failed. We've failed. I've failed for the last 30 years on doing that. We got to make that change, now. And we're late for this. Internally, we formed a diversity and inclusion task force from at our membership level to our volunteers, all the way up to our board. We're having this conversation, and I'm disappointed that's just a conversation. We need to deliver actionable items. But this is a sweet spot. This reaffirms why we're here, why we're hunters. Let's sell what we're passionate about. But again, we got to go ask those people to do this. We got to challenge them to act differently. Otherwise, we're gonna be at a loss for this North American model of hunting.
I like the concept you shared about reaffirming, because perhaps people on the one side of the spectrum that are aging might not be able to get out as much, but I've found when they're able to share their experiences, they still feel connected with it, right? It's a different sense of community and participation. While they can't be in the field, they're still connected here. So that opportunity to just reaffirm that for themselves, connecting with other individuals is a huge aspect. And perhaps while we talk about retention, we often think younger, or new, but maybe reactivation is the retention part too.
Yep. So sharing or reaffirming what all those conservation groups do. We did a survey. We did a national survey of our membership, current PF, current QF, lapse PF, lapse quail, and then we went on social media and surveyed those people who have never joined the organization, but they talk to us through social media. The one consistency that came through is why did you join? Why did you stay? Why did you leave? Why haven't you joined? What would it take for you to join or come back? To be engaged in something meaningful to them. So think about all these conservation organizations, and what would retain them better is having ownership in their own sport, delivering habitat work, right? Giving something back. And if there's so many volunteers, if you say, why do you do this? I want to give something back. I was given something in my life. Now it's my turn to give it back. All those things, to me, those are like DNA markers, right? The more DNA markers, I like to shoot, I like to hunt, I like venison, right? I like my family time, I like being with my dog. And by the way, even putting something back is a DNA marker for myself, that I'm giving something back, and now I have ownership in that acre, in that watershed, in that community. And again, whether it's monarch butterflies or pollinator or wetlands work or harvest, taking down trees or planting trees. I mean, there's such a diverse thing that people can come to this is just amazing. And, again, I'm incredibly excited.
And Adrian, in terms of the question on the Hispanic Sportsman Summit you hosted, I mean, Howard and I both experienced that, and it was impactful for me as well. It really was, and many personal reasons, but we can discuss later. You're working with this organization to build on partnerships with PF and other partners. How is this playing into the community aspect and the affirmation of people being involved? You use the word of belonging. How are you building on that?
Yeah. Thanks for the question, and Howard and Marcia for kicking it off. I think something that Marcia said at the beginning of, being able to get people to switch from the passenger seat to the driver's seat of their own experience, that is a function of mentorship. That's a function of being able to, I really like how Marcia said it, being able to communicate your internal behavioral strategies, being able to communicate your struggles and difficulties with someone like you. I think we could call that like an affinity space. Affinity meaning like you can share this thing and someone not only agrees and sympathizes with you, but has lived that shared experience as well. So it's real. But going from the passenger seat with one of those mentors to the driver's seat requires all of that. So I think, Howard, while we ask all active hunters to go out there and find mentees and find people that we can all take out and hold their hand literally through a hunt. I think there's also an affinity issue there when or like a chicken before the egg issue, where a lot of folks, Black and brown folks in particular, won't be comfortable going out with an older white man. And I've spoken to a lot of women of color in particular that say, even if I go with a group of mentors, I wouldn't be comfortable camping with a man. I wouldn't be comfortable, even just holding a gun out in public. So I think that there are a couple of comfort pieces that we've kind of gotten into, but that really need to be brought to the forefront. But going back to the sort of affinity space that we can create, not only as a broader conservation community, but also respecting that an affinity space is by its nature a sort of intimate, small group of folks with shared lived experiences. What that looks like, I think, for the broader conservation community is to be able to partner with our state agencies and really figure out how do we take just a few extra resources to create, instead of a youth dove hunt, like a Hispanic family dove hunt, or a Black family dove hunt, an LGBTQ dove hunt, that it's just folks that grew up similarly, that have faced similar issues, that they can communicate their behavioral strategies with one another on a hunt. I think at its very core, a hunt is a very emotionally jarring experience for all sorts of reasons. You hike 10, 15 miles for those of us who don't have horses or ATVs, and it's not guaranteed which is, one of the most human things you can do is like hard work with no guarantee at the end. But when you do get something, you get to reflect on just the humanity of hunting your protein, of hunting this clean, created by nature thing. And so tacking all of that on to, you are outside in a space that just the fact that you're wearing $100 boots says something about your trajectory in your professional life. And I'm speaking from my own experience of just last year's hunt. The fact that I had a $200 backpack on meant that, my family's sort of financial outlook over the past decade has been steadily going and going. That's a huge privilege. And so the fact that I had a mentor that, while he didn't share the same experience, there were others in our group that did, other Hispanic young men that shared that same experience. So I really like the idea of passenger seat to driver's seat creates an ownership of your own experience. And then Howard was also talking about having to create an ownership over this resource. I always find it surprising that a lot of folks just don't know that tax dollars, property taxes don't pay for conservation. Like if you go on a hike, you're not paying for conservation in a big way. Conservation is funded by users, hunters and anglers. And so I think folks need to learn that and appreciate that. And also recognize that by buying that hunting permit, by buying that hunting license, even just a fishing license, we have an active role in that conservation, but that's also a call for a responsibility. We should go to game commission meetings. We should make our voices heard on specific rule changes that preclude some community members from accessing. So I think that there's a big piece about being able to create ownership, but that only comes after a great deal of comfort. I've not seen one person give testimony at a legislative arena or before a committee in Congress that was insecure about their role in conservation. It's always very confident people, or at least they present confidently. But that confidence comes from belonging in that community, knowing the subject matter in that community, and knowing the ethic. So while we want to create more conservationists and defenders, we really need to kind of address that first issue of comfort, confidence, and obviously competence with whatever we're doing.
For sure. I mean, you share some great insights. And affinity space is a word I'm learning more about too. Dunphy and Southwick just gave us some insights into mentoring that tested on some of the ideas you just shared about preference in instructors and in group sizes and everything. So I'm excited to kind of consider what you're sharing in light of that research too. And as we look forward as a community of professionals experiencing these same concepts of COVID right now, how we can apply that and keep some of your points in mind. I think the ownership, people protect what they love, right? But you have to feel comfortable in what you love first. And I really like that aspect. We have 2 questions that have popped up. I'm just monitoring time right now. If you guys would be comfortable with it, I do want to tap one question now, and I'm going to read it. It says, as a hunter, how can we encourage agencies to keep up the supply with an increased demand in hunting and fishing? For example, wildlife management and increased populations and opportunities. It seems we have an increase in participants. The lack of supply or opportunity may not help with retaining hunters and anglers. And so somebody want to take the question first? You can see it in front of you too in the Ask a Question poll. Howard, go for it.
I think this goes back to, I will speak for the conservation community. Every organization was formed with that core mission of conservation for their members, for their critter. And the good news is we've continued to do that very well. What we have to do now, this transition of right? We do need diversity and inclusion. We do need to invite a broader community in, which means we have to do all the things we've done historically, plus these things as well. We can't change tracks. We can't let go, because in order to have this community thrive, we need that acre, that quality habitat acre. We need access to it. We need that acre to be successful. That means there needs to be wildlife there, and it needs to be a positive experience. If I'm going to go deer hunting or turkey hunting for the first time, that first time, and if you're not successful, it was still exciting, right? How many times would you do that if you didn't get that turkey? Not very, 2, 3, 4, but you're not going to be a lifetime turkey hunter unless you have success at that. So all these things have to happen, and Adrian touched on it, at the conference on New Mexico. The fishing industry, and this is kudos to RBFF, the recreational boating fishing. They're a decade ahead of the hunting shooting world, engaging for sure the Hispanic community, understanding the limitations of language, community, how that works. And now, and fishing is pretty easy. Now take that to hunting. I need to learn how to shoot. I need to learn where I shoot, what ammo, what type of guns. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. We can do this. We just have to look at that center, find the peers, and I think that's probably that comfort level. Who are those peers out there, that woman to woman? Who's that Hispanic hunter that'd be willing to go to them? My son, when he was in college, I took them and 5, 6 of his friends out who had never touched a gun before. If I walked into a room, again, the 6-year-old guy, and said, "Would you kids like to go out and shoot?" That's scary. That's, beyond icky. My son asks the same question in his peer group, and everyone wants to go, right? The fact that I get to be the authority for the minute, I get to be the driver for just that minute. There was 5 new shooters that had never touched a gun before that thought it was the best thing in the world. Some young women were going to put it on their resume. There was a couple, and I mean, can you imagine how important that was to that individual to say that, of how important that was? And this was just a day shooting some trap from a ham thrower. And if asked, they'll come, but it does have to be someone that they're comfortable with in that peer group. But they're out there, and state partners, you need to drive those individuals to these organizations that have these tools, have these volunteers, to help you deliver your mission as well. So,
agreed. And Adrian, I saw you laugh, maybe commenting on it. The delivery of Howard's perspective on state agencies stepping up. I mean, what's your perspective there?
Yeah, no, and I wasn't like dismissing any of what Howard was saying. I was just laughing at how excellent Howard is on staying on message about calling out to state partners, bring the people out. So that's kind of why I was smiling. It's just such an effective message and a necessary one, and with all the nuance that we need. But going back to the question about encouraging agencies to keep up supply with increased demand in fishing. I mean, shout out to the state agencies that have a difficult job of not only marketing a resource to make sure that they have operating funds, to make sure that Dingell, Johnson, Pittman, Robertson get funded as well. But also a lot of state agencies have the enforcement side of that. So it's as if Ford sold you a car, and then Ford was also responsible for writing you a speeding ticket. And it's like the sales and enforcement is all in the one. So I really appreciate the difficulty of a state agency. And I've been working closer and closer to some state agencies here out in the West. But that question about supply and managing expectations and demand, I think that as a broader conservation community, we deal a lot with scarcity, but it can't become our mindset that, all right, the resource is low. That means we have to just drive to the bottom, get lower so that the resource comes back up. Like Howard was saying, I think and I think there are a lot of conservation scientists out there that know 110% more than I do. But it just seems like because of the funding streams and the ability for programs like LWCF and sort of buyback acre programs and putting money back into the ground, the more users we have, and users don't mean successful hunters, users just means like applicants. The more applicants we have for these programs, the more money gets put back in. So maybe not next year, but in 5-10 years time, we have more money to secure that acreage. We have more money for underpasses and overpasses and connected corridors so that less wildlife are sort of killed by semis and passenger vehicles, and more wildlife are just out and about. So I think that we really need to just take a stand and say, whatever happens, the funding is critical to continuing the resource, and the funding only comes from people being encouraged to continue to apply. So it's a difficult circumstance, and I think one that would take communications professionals to really be able to straddle all of that nuance successfully.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a mix there of a balance of the Ford making a car and then writing a speeding ticket is probably something I won't forget, because that's something perhaps, and I've worked for agencies, I haven't thought about that. We know that marketing is becoming more critical, and side note, when PR Mod passed, marketing was allowed now. So we have this new tool in our resource box to build on that. Marcia, did you want to comment anymore?
Yeah, just a little bit. I mean, Adrian, I agree 100% with what you said. I think access and pressure, both actual and perceived, are important barriers to retaining and to continuing to get on the land, and the agencies deal with that every day. And then, Howard, as you were mentioning, that the quality of the habitat has so much to do with access and with success. And we need to tend to both of those. But I think one thing that hasn't been mentioned yet is the important role that voting plays in that, because these agencies, both the state agencies and the federal agencies, participate under the administration that they're a part of, whether it's through executive orders or whether it's through agendas that are set. And so making conservation, communicating effectively about conservation, incorporating more voices into the conservation conversation is going to make conservation, that, which is already a broadly bipartisan issue, it's going to be that third rail in politics. That's just so important for candidates to tend to once they are in office. And that is really where everybody, regardless of how much time or commitment you have to participating day to day in the conservation community, that's where we all have power.
Some wise words for sure. We're coming up on 3:45, and I can tell you that my team's getting ready for the next session because my phone's buzzing. So I want to jump to one more question, and there's a lot of conversation going on in the chat. Obviously, this is just the first of many conversations to have, but it's going to be the last one that I emailed you all, because I think knowing where you're looking will help others to connect with you. They wanted your contact info, you're popular, so you probably already have a couple emails too. So the last question I posed was, long-term, where will you invest your time and talents to help the conservation and archery community retain participants? So maybe in 2 minutes or less, can you just kind of lay out, where are you looking? Where are you investing your time in the future?
The two things that rise to the top, staying true to the time limit, is amplifying voices on the national level. I think that's one unique role that Artemis plays, is really just handing the microphone to women to participate in the conversation at a national level. And so that's definitely one thing where we will continue to put our energy. But the other thing that is a personal and professional value of mine is relationships. Relationships are so vital. Whether you're engaging people in hunting, fishing, conservation. I like to view conservation as its own R3 initiative. You have to recruit, you have to retain, and you have to reactivate there as well. And relationships, not only the relationship that I have with members of Artemis Sportswomen, but even more importantly, the relationship they have with each other. That's vital. And that's where the longevity lies. And that's where the majority of my focus is and will be moving forward.
Awesome. It's something we look at here within the R3 community too, of professionals, shared experiences. Howard, how about you?
Yeah, I think, I agree with Marcia. I mean, they're same thing. I mean, you don't even have to be a hunter to appreciate what hunters do and telling our story about. So if you're a habitat organization, your impact for pheasants and quail, okay, that's interesting. But the impact on soil, the impact on water, pollinators, monarchs, climate, carbon. I mean, all these things expand your choir, expand your voter base to appreciate. And the really short anecdotal story, when we jumped into pollinators 5-6 years ago, even our chapters went, well, we're giving up on pheasants, and we had to connect the dot between what a baby chick needs, right? They need these insects, and it only comes from good pollinator, wildflowers. This is what they need. By the way, it's the same thing that honeybees need. We had a conference. It was out west in California. We spoke there. An elderly woman stood up at the end of it and said, Pheasants Forever is a hunting organization, and I'm anti-hunting. I don't believe in that. And we just felt like she had a hand grenade that she was going to throw. She said, but nobody does more for pollinators and Pheasants Forever, and I sent my membership in this morning. She sat down. We don't care why they come. They don't have to be a hunter. They don't have to be a shooter. But if they believe in your mission and the broader landscape of this world, and we just need to tell our story. They'll come. They'll vote. The Great American Outdoors Act, PR Mod. These things happened because there was support, energy, and Adrian's just dead on. You can't do anything without that dollar. VPA HIP, creating more access for those state partners out there. It's not enough dollars. We'll keep fighting. There's other bills that are going to impact this. Instead, for us, we live and breathe historically by the Farm Bill, but there's the transportation bill, the energy bill, COVID dollars for resources. We don't want to put those dollars into concrete. We want to put it in sustainable, responsive, natural systems, across the country. That's where we need to be beating the drum, and we need better science, right? We need to use that science, that logic, to tell those stories. We can have as many jobs out there on the landscape doing natural systems versus putting concrete barriers up and think we're going to stop hurricanes and tornadoes.
So come one, come all. If they can connect to your mission, you can build a space to bring them in and include them. Adrian, how about you? Where are you looking in the future? I know one thing I forgot to mention. A couple of organizations here have multi-state grants that they will be doing projects with. So there's already projects going on too. So Adrian, where are you looking in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the strength of TRCP is its partnership model. We are really good at bringing people together. And, I think in the Hispanic sportsman space and conservation space, we really just want to bring people together with their state agencies. There's a lot of potential for the state agencies to address some of these engagement recruitment issues. Obviously, they need some dollar, but I think that convening with state partners and regional partners to see, why doesn't your mentorship program have 100% retention? Why does your user base look a certain way, even though your community might look another way? We have a fund from the National Shooting Sports Foundation, a grant that we got recently, and it was all about testing the hypothesis of, if we partner with Colorado Parks and Wildlife to really survey the Hispanic community in the area and tailor a guided hunt, will more people come? If we offer to cover their transportation, their food, maybe they need help renting equipment, will more people come? And so we're still in the process of testing that hypothesis, and I'm sure National Shooting Sports Foundation will be happy to share some of those findings. But also partnering with other folks to maximize opportunities under the multi-state conservation grant programs that come out. I think there's a lot of opportunity to maximize the excellent people power and the intelligent people that we have at state agencies. And the nonprofits definitely have a responsibility to bring together all those partners, bring together all those thoughts, and create these community-driven solutions to the issues of recruiting and retaining communities. So that's where I hope to be putting a lot of my time coming soon. And I heard that there were a lot of state agency folks on listening in today, and I would jump at the opportunity to start a conversation about some of the local state stakeholders that you want to engage but maybe haven't, but also just sort of a philosophical idea to leave with. When we think about stakeholders, we need to be cognizant that there's a whole set of people and community organizations and communities that we haven't connected with that idea of stakeholder yet. So we need to continually amplify the idea of what a stakeholder really is. It's not just conservationists and ranchers. Sometimes it's just folks working jobs that want to get outdoors.
I think that's maybe some of the element that Howard showed from his California story too, connecting with a pollinator, maybe not being a hunter, but they were on the landscape and wanted to connect with the conservation message. So I think you guys are sharing a lot of similar perspectives, but also you each have offered great nuggets of just your experiences and bringing that to the table. I wish we would have scheduled more time. I'm excited about this conversation. We will host more of this. I appreciate you guys just taking some time with us to sit down and chat. We will have a happy hour afterwards at 5 o'clock. We're going to have some of our tech presenters come on board, which is also potentially a great way to connect with new audiences. I know we have licensed vendors showing up. We have apps like Go Wild and Outdoor Access and other tools that can help broaden that tent and getting more people to connect with conservation. So we tapped into a bunch of different concepts here. This is just a start. Stick with us. You know we'll be seeing more of you guys soon. So thank you for taking your time and for just participating with us. For those of you that are tuned in, please give us a moment. We're probably going to just do that magic that JD described in his opening remarks, where Sawyer will bring you into the next session. And again, thank you. Please use the chat to do a virtual round of applause. We appreciate everything. Thank you very much. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.